I'm delighted to be back at Dartmouth, but first of all, I wanted to start with a small confession. And that was when I left the college in 2006, the only thing that I knew about Facebook and that I advised students about on Facebook was to be careful about your online identity. I did not see it as the next big thing in job search. I did not predict that there would be a day when college career offices would have fan pages and use it as a way to connect with students. I was a complete Luddite on Facebook until about 2 years ago, and I've only been on Twitter for 18 months, and I've just written a book about it. And I think in some ways that's symbolic of social media as a whole, and I think one of the biggest things that we've seen in this recession, and there's been a lot of talk about how there are diminished opportunities across sectors. There's been a lot of talk about the high unemployment rate. And there hasn't been enough talk about what I'm seeing as a major trend, which is that people are getting jobs every day. That 90% of the population is still employed. Ivy League graduates are still very much in demand, as are current students for internships. And I think first and foremost that social media is a really effective way to look online, and it's in many ways dramatically shortened the process that it can take you to build some really effective relationships and networking throughout the world. So through Twitter, I have made friends with career coaches in Poland. I have scored a last-minute concert ticket to U2. And I got the chief marketing officer of Eastman Kodak to get back to me in 30 minutes with a permission request for publication for something that we needed for our book. All of this I can't have imagined accomplishing 3 years ago. And so one of the things that I want to talk about over the course of this next week and the time that we have together is how you can leverage these tools in your job search and also over the course of your overall career, whether you're currently looking for a job or you're already happily employed, to deepen relationships you have with other people and to connect with other people. And that I also think that social media is not about sitting behind a computer all day. It's about developing new ways to interact with people and engage, and then ideally taking those conversations and that dialogue offline. But I wanted to start with an overall just sort of flashback. Many of you may have seen a video online which talks about the impact of Web 2.0. Basically, it took radio 38 years to reach an audience of 50 million. It took the iPod 3, and it took Facebook 2 years. And it's hard today to even look back and realize that YouTube is 5 years old, if that. So we're really living in a period of time where a company can establish themselves so quickly to be a household name in such a short span of time. And I really believe you can do that too if it's what you choose to do. One of the things I also feel very strongly is that not everyone needs to use social media in the same way. And your social media goals are in many ways up to you to determine. This is just a snapshot of overall social media growth. And one of the things that some key demographics I'd like to share with you. LinkedIn is growing at 1 new member every second. In September 2008, they had 15 million members. By the summer, they were up to 45 million. Just absolutely exponential growth. 100 million people log into Facebook every day. And the fastest growing demographic of Facebook users are your parents. So I think all of this is just, really exploding. So again, over 300 million users on Facebook. Every second a new user joins LinkedIn, and up to 3,000 jobs are posted every minute. Actually, I'd like to revise that. Was it every hour? I think it's every hour. I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe in a year it'll be every hour, but every minute. Employers are using social media in many different ways. But one of the most important things I want you to understand is that they're using it a lot, and they're using it for different reasons. First and foremost, when I worked as a recruiter here in the Upper Valley, it cost me about $450 to $500 to post a position in the Upper Valley online. Part of that was because of the location, because we had to buy media or coverage for 5 different geographical areas because of the awkward place we're sitting. Or not awkward, it's really lovely, but you know how we're straddling both Vermont and New Hampshire. Part of that was because it's just expensive. And employers are really, 10 years ago, newspapers started to die because everyone was going away from classified ads and going online. Now, for many employers, it's free to reach people through sites such as LinkedIn and Twitter, and you can also learn much more about people. Sites, in many ways, can be virtual resume databases. And so, just as your professional association offers you the opportunity to network with people in your field, LinkedIn is a resume database of 45 million resumes, if you think about it. Of those resumes which are public, it's the only opportunity I've ever seen to be able to see how other people are presenting themselves. So one of the things that we'll talk about on Thursday is how you can use LinkedIn to find out how somebody else who's studying the same thing you are, only at Caltech, is presenting their experience. So, in the words of Steve Martin, it's okay to borrow a sentence or two. I mean, not a whole idea, you know, plagiarism is a very bad thing, but if you're stuck trying to figure out how to articulate your skills, you're not alone. Other people have done it before. And one of the best values of LinkedIn and other social media tools is in watching and observing how other people do things. And I think one of the things that's scary about it, also conversely, is that it goes beyond what the law allows. So for example, traditionally it's been taboo for employers to ask, how old are you? You know, or to make a judgment on that. To say, what do you look like? You know, what's your ethnicity? There are very clear government regulations about that. And social media has just kind of bypassed all of that. In the last 2 years, it's suddenly become hip and expected to post your picture online. So there are all these different cans of worms that mean that you really have to monitor it, especially because they're using it so much more. A company called JobVite conducted a survey recently about how many employers were using social media, and 79% said that they were using it actively now. Of those, a different subset of recruiters who also were using acknowledged using social media were asked how often they Googled candidates. You probably saw that in the teaser for this program, but 86% of them said that they would Google a candidate before they hired. And 44% of those individuals said they had chosen not to hire somebody based on what they found online. So we'll be talking a little bit about how to, as Mary says, repackage information, as I say, bury. But I think that's a really important point. There are 5 different ways that I believe employers can find you online. They will Google you simply by typing in your name. Many employers often look for candidates deliberately. They may have search agents that scour the web almost like spiders looking for particular people. How many of you use Google News Alerts? Anyone familiar with the technology? Do you want to talk about what Google News Alerts do?
Sure. So I get news alerts. Like I work at the Dartmouth Center for Advancement of Learning, so I get a news alert anytime decal is mentioned on a website. I get an email about it.
So you can type in keywords. So for example, I could type in, if I was a recruiter and I was looking for chemical engineers with a master's degree and internship experience in photovoltaics. I'm just making all this up. It would scour the web and it would deliver these results directly to me. So I think many employers are often also using this technology. 95% of employers that responded to the JobVite survey were using LinkedIn as a way to identify candidates. And the LinkedIn summary section allows employers to search for keywords, and depending on how many people, if you've completed that section, your information will come up higher in the overall rankings, which is really helpful to know, because 80% of people who use LinkedIn don't complete the summary. So that's an easy way to get noticed instantly, just by simply saying, this is what I do, and using the same keywords that employers are using to describe what they need. Finally, employers find you through online tracking systems. When I worked as a recruiter, I used a system called Taleo. And Taleo allowed me, for each job I posted, to say, these are the keywords for what I'm looking for. So if I was looking for a software engineer, first thing I'd put in is software engineer. Then I'd put in my programming languages. Then I'd put in my educational requirements. And before I even went to review resume results, sitting in my queue of applications, I could see a score. And that score would say, 80% or 20%. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is, so oftentimes their resume is never even getting seen because their score isn't high enough. And many times you have the skills, you have the information, but if the keyword isn't in the document and it's not being seen by a human, that's a challenge. And I don't want you to be depressed by that, because there's so much you can do to change that. And I think in many ways, a really, one of the best practices for social media is to try to connect each online application to a real live person within the company. So if you're applying to an organization, apply online to the company, and then try through social media to identify a real live person and shoot them a message and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know I applied for this particular position. It works especially well when you already have a previous relationship with that person, or if your friend does and can give you an introduction. But I think it's a really important piece. Finally, your network. Employers, just like they have throughout the ages, are always more likely to listen to their current employees and people they know in getting recommendations. And in any job market, perennially, I'm going to ask Donna again for the 69% of jobs are found through networking. One of the things that I think is really important when you think about sort of how to manage this stuff online is the difference between lean back and lean in. This is the term that people in New York, someone who, when I first moved to New York 3 years ago, I literally didn't know what new media was as much. So there was a panel, and we had a panel on it. Someone from Nickelodeon, I said, how do you define new media? And she said, the way that we define it in-house is the difference between lean back and lean forward. And it's a metaphor that's made a lot of sense for me. And the idea is that traditional media, just like the traditional job search, is a very passive experience. You're an observer. It's as if you're watching TV. So it's the old equivalent of submitting your resume to a resume book. You get to school in September, you submit your resume, you wait for an employer to find you. Conversely, new media is a very active experience. So for example, how many of you spent more than 3 hours on email or Blitzmail? Okay, same thing. Blitzmail can be an active experience. Sometimes I found for me, sometimes it was passive because there was just so much of it. But again, with social media, you determine your level of involvement, but the game is really kind of a mandatory one because 95% of employers are searching LinkedIn. You want to be in the game. So it's important to lean in a little bit. There are 3 keys for sort of managing your online identity in a lean forward way. The first is really to know your Google search results, and we'll talk about how to do that. I'm also going to send you home with a short homework assignment. It's really easy. It's a great way to sort of benchmark your progress and make sure that your information that's coming up is relevant to what you want to be known for. You want to summarize your skills in terms that can be understood. And I think that's especially important for those of you who are studying science because you know so many things that employers often don't realize you know unless you tell them. So for example, if you're working in a lab, How many of you work in labs? All of you know compliance. All of you know how regulatory works. I've seen so many resumes from scientists that never mention those words. So that's a classic example of a keyword that might be hiding not on a resume, that might be in a skills and qualifications. You look like you might have a question on that. No? Okay. Sure? Okay. Also, you want to plant information about you that can be found online. So one of the questions earlier was, how do I repackage information if there's information on the site, on my site, that isn't flattering about me? Or let's say there's information about something I did in high school with my friends, you know, at a picnic or something, that doesn't necessarily need to be my first and foremost search result. And my answer is, generally, you can use these sites very easily within the span of, say, 4 hours to create profiles for yourself that make it very easy, that are going to have a high enough search return rate that you're going to be able to bury those previous details relatively easy. And we'll talk later about how you can do that with LinkedIn, Google Profiles, and Zoom. I've developed what I call the reverse pyramid scheme, or the online presence pyramid. I live in New York right now, and pyramid schemes are really big. They tend to send people to jail, but my pyramid is kind of a different version of the pyramid. So I feel like the first and foremost thing in my pyramid, what's most important is the bottom, because you have to have a solid foundation. And what I believe is most important is reputation management. So some of you may walk away today, you may hear from your advisor may say, I have a great opportunity for you. It's a 5-year contract, it's funded, it's secure, you know, you don't need to look for anything. And you might say, you know what, I don't have time. You know, my online presence isn't that important to me. And as I said before, you know, it's a matter of personal choice. Not everybody needs the same online presence. But what is important is that you know what other people are saying about you, and if you, what other people are saying about people who might share your name. So for example, I have a friend named Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson lives in DC. He's a lawyer. There are not many people named Boris who have the last name Johnson. So you would think he would be pretty safe. He works for the State Department. There's also a convicted murderer in DC named Boris Johnson. So it's really helpful for him to know that there's another Boris Johnson that he could be confused with, so that he can say, hi, I'm Boris Johnson. I am not the murderer. You know? So it's really important to know those aspects as well. The second aspect of my pyramid is about presence and about knowing and defining who you are and what you're studying. I think if you're entering the job market, or if you're currently employed, this is a really important piece of it in terms of your professional visibility within your field, and also for when someone goes and Googles you. Because if I'm choosing between two candidates and they've both got the same skill set, the same experience, and I go to Google them as a way to figure out who I'm going to hire, and one person, I see their Facebook information, I can see who they're friends with on MySpace, and that's it. And the other person, I see the conferences that they went to. I get a sense of their professional associations because it's on LinkedIn. I can see a paper they've written or a writing sample. Who am I going to hire? You know, it's pretty open and shut, because that's somebody that just looks enthusiastic from the get-go. So I think presence is really important. And the third aspect, which in many ways, for many people, it's a decision that individuals make when they want to work on Madison Avenue in New York City, is digital distinction. And digital distinction, I'm going to ask Donna I'm going to call you on the carpet again and ask you to describe this a little bit.
Being digitally distinct essentially is standing out and making sure that either if there is somebody else with your name, you know, your reputation, what you've done makes an impression on the net, and you can stand out from all the other, you know, scientists or all the other graduates out there, so that people will be compelled to look at your profile online. And you know, you appear interesting from the get-go. There's going to be some element that, you know, a recruiter or employer looking at your profile will say, I want to look at this person and learn more about them, basically. So I think that sums it up.
And we'll talk a lot about on Thursday about how you can, if you want to go that route, how you can stand out and make yourself known with only a few questions. There was a fellow, I think, on Twitter this fall who got a TV contract after 68 140-character messages about stuff his dad said. Literally. He was so funny. He also had some previous contacts, but he was so funny, and he built up such a following that after 68 messages, he had TV executives calling him and saying, we'd like to, you know, take your show big time. That's a rare case, but I think, you know, it can for those people who pursue it. Many people have found that it works rather well for them. But going back to reputation management, I think there are three basics, and they're the same for all job hunters, and they're the same for people who are currently employed. You want to know how you're going to be found. You want to define your overall boundaries in terms of what's acceptable. So, for example, one of the things that you can do with your friends is to tell them to take down some of the photos that you've been tagged on, or you can untag yourself on occasion. So sort of defining your boundaries and how you want to be known, and then deciding for yourself how you want to market yourself in terms of your career and your job search. Staff members at Career Services help you determine what's most appropriate. And there are many, many ways to distinguish yourself. Like I know back in the day when Carrie and I were starting out, there were in academia, there was a PhD student, I believe, I'm not sure what this was always an example we used at the University of Pennsylvania when I worked there, who created their own website of just resources that they used when they researched for papers. And that ended up to become the definitive website for their field. So when they went to conferences and they said, hi, you know, I'm so-and-so from, I don't even think they were from Penn, people said, oh, you're the person with the website. And it was such a point of differentiation that when they went to look for a job, everybody wanted to hire that person. And I think that's an important piece of it. As far as starting your reputation management, I really recommend that everyone set up a Google alert on your own name. It doesn't have to be, I know people call it an ego search. Donna calls it G-credibility, or what's your G-cred, just like street cred. But it will alert you anytime somebody says something about you or your name. It's really rough if your name is Dave Matthews. I met a Dave Matthews a couple months ago in a presentation I gave, and I told him not to worry about it because his results were way too far down anyway. But yes.
Well, I have a question. What if you have a very, very common name? Like, how are you going to distinguish it? Like, what if my name is Jane Smith?
Uh-huh. Do you have a middle name? Do you have a middle name?
Yes. But, I mean, there could be several J.A. Smith, too. I mean, it's very, very common.
Well, that's a great
Or
way.
John Smith, you know, John B. Smith. There could be another 20 John B. Smiths out there.
So Jane Smith, what do you study?
Globalization.
Globalization. And you study that at Dartmouth College?
Yes. Master's in the Maths department.
Okay. So you might rename yourself in LinkedIn. You can have a custom URL. So you might become Jane Smith Globalization.
Okay.
You know, and you put that at the end of your name. You use that in the first part of your title on LinkedIn. You use that on as your username for different accounts. And then you manage to not only have, you know, a slightly unique search result for your name, but that can translate across platforms. So Carrie Landers, if there are multiple other Carrie Landers at career offices across the country, she could become Carrie Landers Dartmouth. or she could become Carrie Landers, EDD. I think one of the next big trends is really attorneys and law firms and colleges and employers really defining their own social media policies and making that very clear. But because right now, there are not many. I've heard of HR directors being fired for writing LinkedIn recommendations for employees when their company has a no recommendation policy. You know, so there are lots of subtle things that are affecting employees currently in the market, but I think as a whole, that's something I expect to change a lot. I think right now, I haven't ever heard of a case of that. But
Well, I was just going to suggest that I think the more websites that you're on that are consistent and linked to each other all bring up the rankings of, you know, that information about you. So, so if there are a series of Jane A. Smiths on Google profile, I mean, right? On your Google profiles, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of creating a Google profile for yourself. You can include where you lived, you know, in pictures, all kinds of things that start to strengthen the information about you. And then visual CV, if you add on a visual CV as well as your LinkedIn profile, and all of these start to create this much stronger presence that in turn bring up your ranking. Am I right?
right.
I think, in
So if Jane Smith Globalization is suddenly on 4 sites, is Jane Smith interested in globalization? If I'm a recruiter and I know you're studying globalization, I'm going to go in the first place and type in Jane Smith and globalization, and those results are going to come up faster. And as Donna was saying, as you begin to work your job search, if you're using the same consistent language on different websites, you're creating a consistent online ID for yourself. And onlineidcalculator.com is a website, it's in your handout, and they have a wonderful exercise that will help you determine your level of digital distinction and also help you benchmark where you need to be. So, you know, relative to where you are in your career. So it's a nice exercise. It takes about half an hour. You just need a piece of paper or maybe a spreadsheet open, and the website will walk you right through it. It's a great overall exercise. In terms of deep background research, what people are saying about you, again, Pipel is a site that contains your vital information. This is all in the handout as well. ZoomInfo is a spider site that scares me because it basically comes up with a bio for you on your behalf if you haven't completed it. It doesn't take that long to go in and just claim it as your own. And some people it won't. If you haven't been that active online, you won't have a ZoomInfo profile, but if you do, you want to go ahead and just monitor that. Spokeo is a site that gives you a baseline of your online presence. And Donna, do you want to speak about that site?
It's kind of scary too, in that anybody can take your email address, plug it into Spokeo, and see which sites you are registered on or what. So it started out as friends just wanting to know what other friends were doing, and now law enforcement use it, recruiters, and anybody else who gets hold of your email address. So, you know, my recommendation is have a very specific email address that you only use for your job search. But you might want to just check it out. It's kind of daunting to see.
And you can also control how much information is available about you through whois.com. So it almost goes without saying, but I had to say it anyway. You know, certainly there's some things that you should never do online. The bikini shot as your LinkedIn picture is probably one of them. Party pics with excess consumption evidence never goes well. I had a student when I was at Penn who came in and said he was webmaster for his fraternity, and he said, "Can I put that on my resume?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I know that's drinkmorebeer.com, and that is not a good site." So off it went, because that would have hurt him unless he was applying in Hollywood for or for a position with Anheuser-Busch, that was not going to help him out. Racy comments, profanity, and derogatory slams, even things that you might say casually in a wall posting on Facebook or on Twitter, I really don't recommend, because it will get you not hired. And a lot of times you might not even ever know that. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. Every year there's a huge football game, the state football game championship. This year it was the weekend before my book was due. So I went into Twitter's search engine to see what people were saying about the game. And you can just type in Gamecocks and you'll get a sense of where things are going with the score. And I saw a comment from a young woman who just put out like 3 or 4 slurs right in a row about Gamecocks because they were winning. They won. She was a Clemson fan. And it was all I could do not to write her back and say, do you realize you may have just cost yourself a job? Because, here she's thinking, it's Saturday, I'm at a football game, but she's using her real name. She's posting things that if somebody finds online can really, really deep six her as a candidate. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm also going to say anything that has to do with Tucker Max. You don't know who Tucker Max is? You really shouldn't. He's pretty off color. So anything that would offend your mom, just keep off the web. Yep. What was it?
I have a question. So it's easy to control what you put out there, but it's so easy for someone to make a profile, put your picture up and use your name to say things that they perhaps wouldn't say under their own, or how do you control against intentional sabotage? I guess it's illegal, but...
Well, I think sometimes, if it's something with Facebook or if it's something with LinkedIn or a lot of the online sites, you can contact the site administrator and say, this was written about me, this is not me, this needs to go away. And many times those administrators will take down the information. You can also just say, this is, I ask you to take this down. This is not true, and this is, inappropriate. And
But half the thing is knowing about it, right? I guess.
well, half of it is knowing about it, but again, there are so many of these companies have, LinkedIn has such a high Alexa rating or search ranking, and really the most important search ratings for your own name are the first 2 pages. The first 2 pages are pretty much the things that matter. I think what's most important to employers is not your brand per se, but how you meet their needs. And we'll talk about how that works in a job search. But really you want to pick some selected sites to be active. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be on a zillion sites. But picking the ones that make sense for your field and that are being most widely used by employers, I think is really important. And some examples of that, again, are LinkedIn, ZoomInfo is one, Plaxo is another. But what's important is when you are trying to develop a presence that you ensure that the accuracy of your information, it's the same as with your resume. You want it to be typo-free, and you want to be able to be found. So if you're becoming Jane Smith Globalization, you want to make sure that you're Jane Smith Globalization across sites. And I think one of the most important things about social media is that you want to share information with other people, and you want to engage with people. And a large part of social media is about not calling yourself an expert on everything and engaging in conversation with others. So it's absolutely okay to ask questions on social media. In fact, it's encouraged. One of the most active sites on LinkedIn, or parts of LinkedIn, is their question and answer section. And you can search it for hundreds of questions, and you can ask questions your own. And as we were talking before about a young woman named Kelly Giles at the University of North Carolina last year, asked the question, should I go to law school? And she had a huge number of responses, and she ultimately got a job in social media after using it to ask that question. So it's perfectly okay to use it to gather information as well as to look like an expert. And one of the things that people say is very inappropriate about social media is only using it as a means to your own end. So there's a great YouTube video of a seagull in Scotland who on multiple occasions would walk into this convenience store and he would steal a bag of Doritos. And so every time he went in, he'd just go in, he'd steal the cheese Doritos, he'd take them out and he'd eat them. And people call seagulls on the internet people who just fly in when they need something. So it's like your friend that you hear from every 7 years when they need something, you know, and that's all they're good for is when they need something. So you really want to avoid being a seagull, and simply by showing that you're willing to share with other people and that you're giving, that can also go a long way in your job search. Quick ways to influence. Strong LinkedIn profile. Probably the #1 way that you can get started. And it doesn't have to be super in-depth. It can simply, when you start out, we'll talk about how to develop a summary on Thursday. But in the beginning, you know, all you need is a presence on LinkedIn. The college students have been, as a whole, very slow to get on LinkedIn. As of last year, I think the average age on LinkedIn in August 2008 was 38. The average salary the median household income was over 100,000. So it's a relatively affluent site. And there are a lot of people on there who can potentially help you get a job. So it's an easy way to get started and get your feet wet. There are also lots of groups that involve the college and Dartmouth alumni who are willing to help you find jobs. So that's a really easy way to get started. Creating a Google profile is another really great way to influence your search results positively. Updating your Zoom info is also important because you want to make sure that what other people are saying about your biography is in fact correct. And as a final, there's a site called Visual CV that I'm calling Extra Credit because Visual CV essentially lets you develop a portfolio for yourself. And a number of people have gotten really good media coverage based on their use of visual CVs, and it can help you get hired because it's a place like LinkedIn in some ways in which you can store PowerPoint presentations and samples of your work that can enhance your job search. But with that caveat, I would also say if you're a current student or if you're an employee, you want to be very careful about what work samples you put up online. Because, for example, if I'm working with a public relations firm and my firm handled Tiger Woods publicity, that might be a big feather in my cap, but the publicity firm doesn't want me to say who their high-profile client is. So you want to be very careful that whatever you submit online is something that your employer is comfortable with. And I think that's true across the board for how you write up your LinkedIn profile description. So a great best practice for developing your resume descriptions is to go back to your former employers or your former colleagues and say, can you help me write this description? And sometimes they can help you make it sound more impressive because they know what happened to your work after you left. And oftentimes they can help you revise it in a way that makes it sound like you did more than you felt like you did. And you know that you've got their blessing on the description as you move forward. So again, digital distinction. What is it that works online? Before you venture out, you want to see how other people do it. So I'm going to close today by just talking a little bit about the research I did over the past year on how people are using social media and how you can use it for yourself as sort of a preview to our discussion on Thursday. So last year, I did research on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, culminating in my decision to write a book on Twitter on how job seekers should use Web 2.0 technologies and how they were using them. So I surveyed LinkedIn users via a question and answer feature. I did a focus group with a group of New York City-based job seekers that I work with. And I had discussions with clients and colleagues of my professional association. And what I found was that LinkedIn, and this has proved true across the board with everyone I've talked to, is really one of the better sites for business and professional use. Again, it's got a very high Alexa ranking in terms of search engine results. It's very full-featured. You can do everything from ask questions and get answers to growing your online presence and connecting with other people. So for example, you might have 57 connections, but those 57 people, because you can also see who your connections are connected with and who your connections are connected with, those 57 people may give you access to a community of 237,000, which can really help you widen your network as you apply for positions. It's very actively used by employers and job hunters. There are links to it on many job boards. So for example, if you are looking for a job on Indeed.com, which is a great website, job search board, it's an aggregator, that will pop up and say, okay, you want to apply for a job at McNeil Pharmaceuticals. Here's who is in your network from McNeil Pharmaceuticals. And you might not know that person directly, but you can get in touch with them. That had originally, I think it's probably still true, though Twitter is nipping on its heels, the highest number of job leads. I use it as a strategic approach to network building. I always know the people that I connect with well before I connect with them. So I'm discriminating in terms of who I'm friends with. On LinkedIn, you send invitations. The question was, would you recommend having a separate profile for your personal and professional accounts? And my answer was, LinkedIn does not allow you to do that, but Facebook does. That's what many people use Facebook for. And in fact, I found that when I surveyed recruiters, unilaterally, I got an angry answer from recruiters. I do not ever, ever want to be friended by my candidates. It's for my friends. It is my private space. They didn't say, I will look at your Facebook and I will decide not to hire you based on what I found. But many of them will make that decision. But essentially, they use it to place ads at times. They use it for groups. Some people use it for scouting for talent. But in general, recruiters don't like it. Okay, so the question was, it feels invasive. So employers don't want to friend me on Facebook, but they're going to look at my friends and they're going to look at what I'm doing and making a decision whether to hire me or not. And I think the answer to that is, it is. It's tough.
My question,
So the question was on second part of the question was on privacy settings, and whether or not you could get around, you could just trust in your privacy settings. My answer is never. And I hate to have to say that, but I really feel like, when you've got sites like Spokeo, when you've got sites like Pipel, when you've got spiders going across the web, when you've got viruses, when you've got attacks, when you've got hackers who've been capable of shutting down Twitter and Facebook and even Gmail, your privacy online is probably as sacred as a postcard. I mean, there are certain things you should never do on Facebook. Like, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the Facebook fairy? So there was a student, I think he was at Holy Cross. He was interning. He told his boss he had a family emergency and he needed to leave. And he posted pictures of himself. It was over Halloween. And he posted pictures of himself dressed as a fairy with a beer, smiling into the camera. And his boss wrote him and said, Kevin, it was so nice so sorry that you're sick. Hope everything's gotten better. Look forward to seeing you back. P.S. Nice wand. That made it all over the world. Was picked up by every major media outlet. He lost his internship, and he became forever branded as the Facebook fairy. Employers aren't going, if you're 21, employers aren't going to go on and say, oh my gosh, she drinks. Her job, forget it. I'm not hiring her. If you go on and they see something like, oh, I barely escaped a DUI last night, that hurts you, So.
I'm looking for graduate students and postdocs to work with undergrads, and they don't know enough not to post a picture of themselves with a beer. then I'm a little judgmental, and I'd say, you know, I'm not sure of their judgment.
Well, I think it depends. I mean, I think it depends. The employers that I've talked to, for the most part, I mean, if it's your profile picture, I would say no alcohol. But I also think that across the board, most employers, when they screen you out, they're screening you out because they've seen blatant unprofessional. I mean, things that anybody would say, okay, you know, pictures of you passed out. With nail polish, you know, on your, you know, a guy passed out with his toes painted. That's the kind of thing that I think can get you out of the running.
So if you don't have good judgment in that kind of situation, you know, they're going to apply that to, well, what, you know, are you going to have good judgment in other situations? I think essentially it speaks to that fundamental, you know, issue.
Jen, how careful or cautious should you be about keeping your political and religious views, or keeping them sort of not online?
I would say just keeping things clean overall. I mean, I used to say no political, no religious, no anything, but I find that for many people that can be the springboard to discussion if it's done appropriately. I think it depends on what type of environment you want to work in, what the culture is for that environment, and, you know, figuring that nuance out. And I would say that in one way it's similar to the person on Twitter who wrote, I just got my security clearance. You know what? You just lost it. Because you can't talk about your security clearance online. That's what makes it a secret, right? So I think it's really important just to ask yourself, you know, how could this potentially affect me?
What's important to you. So you might be, your religious community might be it might be important. You're an important part in that community. You may play an important role, as well as a political organization. So that's all important to you and that's meaningful to you. So for example, on LinkedIn, there are any number of political groups that you can be a member of, as well as, you know, religious organizations have community groups on LinkedIn, and that might be a huge, you know, part of your networking community that that you're a part of, and if that's important to you, then, you know, there's nothing to hide about it.
Well, and one feature that LinkedIn does have is they let you choose whether to show that you're a member of a group on your profile or not. So for example, my New York City job seekers group, they can hide that they're a member of my LinkedIn group on their site, and that's fine with me. And you know, you may want to do that with your accounts, or as Donna said, or you know, with some of your, with like Spokio, if you have a different account that you belong to different organizations with that isn't associated with your name, that's also a nice way to navigate that boundary. So finally, the last site that I'm talking about today is one I'm particularly passionate about because I love it, which is Twitter. I haven't tweeted since Saturday. I don't live on it. I don't think you have to. I don't think it's all about what you ate for lunch. I do think it requires observation before participating, and that it can be a great way to have discussions with people in your field. And then it's a dance between professional and personal information sharing. So on Twitter, for example, if you post only things about your job search, you won't make as many friends as if you also share your interests. And that's something that can be kind of an art, and that I've had a lot of fun with. Last year I won a holiday writing contest with someone they paired me with for a jingle who was in California. And so I made a new friend that way, and it was a lot of fun. But there's a strong community of career professionals on the site, and you can also get a lot of career advice. And I'll give you my account handle on Thursday. And there are lots of resources for job seekers on Twitter. How I use it, I created my own community. It started out rather small, now it's quite large, but I'm able to gather that through what's called lists. It's a tool for sharing information. It's a tool for catching up on news. We hear about the earthquakes first because a lot of times when something big happens, before they're even verified, it goes out. And conversely, you hear a lot of rumors that aren't always necessarily true, but I find that it's a really useful site for me. And that you can get a lot of job leads through it. And in fact, in the course of researching for my book, I spoke to over a dozen job seekers who found jobs using Twitter in all different ways. And I think it's hopefully the next big thing, because that's what I wrote a book about. No, that's not a very convincing answer. But again, as I mentioned, I think in many ways it's the shortest connection, because unlike LinkedIn and Facebook, there's no barrier to connecting with somebody. So if you find something that somebody says interesting, you can connect with them, and they have the option to block you or to not engage in conversation with you, but for the most part they don't. So less than 10% of communication requests are denied. So it's a really great way to get new conversations started. So that's, in brief, my overview of Social Media 101. My overall findings, again, are that monitoring how people talk about you online is really essential. Personal branding is optional. Fear of digital dirt can be a stress factor. But at the same time, you can effectively use the technology in order to bury information. And essentially, on Thursday, we'll be showing you how to communicate consistently across platforms to showcase information. So that's information for today. Do we have time for a couple questions? Or we? Okay. So the question was. The question was, are you allowed to create multiple profiles on LinkedIn? Yeah. And the answer was no. So what you can do is create one summary that speaks to your eclectic and diverse interests. And your career office can help you refine that as far as how you present that in a professional context. Okay, so the question is, on LinkedIn, how do you make a unique profile that showcases your skills? Yeah. I would say by speaking in, we're going to cover that on Thursday, but I think some of the essentials in a great LinkedIn profile are having a strong tagline or an introductory line that says who you are, what you do. So it might be master's student at Dartmouth College, passionate about globalization. Period. You know, that might be your tagline, depending on whether you're, what you're studying and what your career goals are. It might be, I study this and I hope to work, with the goal of working as, I need an example here. But essentially, you can use it to project what your goals are. You can also just use it to sum up what you're interested in having conversations about. But it's a really great way to engage in conversations with other people and to be found for a job. I had a friend who was laid off 2 years ago. She had a very sick child she needed to take care of, and then she had to go back into a job search. She had hundreds of friends, but nobody could help her when she started looking for a job because she was looking for something very specific. Her background was in pharmaceutical sales for neuropsychiatry drugs in Tennessee. And she said to me, she unfortunately lost her child in the process, and she said, I don't know how I'm going to find a job because, I'm never going to find a job making as much money as I did before because I'm looking for a job selling neuropharmaceutical drugs in Tennessee. And she went into LinkedIn and she plugged in all the information in her summary profile with a friend. And 2 weeks later, she got a phone call and she got a job making more money than she made before because somebody needed someone selling neuropharmaceutical drugs in Tennessee. And so I really think that in many ways, these technologies can be a very fast way to find jobs. But it's still about engaging with other people, and it's still about having authentic conversations. So the question was, how do I deal with identity theft? And there are 3 government agencies or government sites that you can register with, I believe for free. I want to say Experian is the name of one, but if you type in consumer protection or identity theft, it will come up in Google. you register with those sites at the outset, and that will protect you. I did it several years ago, and I've never had any problems. I would also say that it's widespread enough in terms of use of things that I wouldn't prevent yourself from using the social media sites because you're afraid. And that, as I said before, if you set up a Google News alert, if you're responsible about monitoring that, and if there are problems, if you contact the site administrators, they have to take it down and make sure that you avoid as much of that as possible. Yeah.
I mean, I was just writing about this today. You don't need to include your birth date at all. Everybody includes their birth date and the year of their birth on Facebook. Why do that? Obviously, LinkedIn does not require you to include any personal information, whether it's a telephone number, an address, your birth date. They're trying to copycat Facebook to include all that information, but there's no requirement whatsoever, and it doesn't, there's no added value there. So the thing with LinkedIn, for example, which is the most important professional site, you can have it's your work profile up there, which no one, I don't think, I can't say for sure, but it's just your work information, really, and there's nothing, it's not where you live or your social security number, any important information like that people can steal and use. And if there's, one place where you are open to the public, it's LinkedIn, because I think that really is just, it's information that's not going to harm you in any way, and there's very minimal spam on the site like LinkedIn. You can prevent it based on who you connect with. So I think in terms of worrying about your privacy and who can steal that information, there are words on a page about what you've done in your life, but there's nothing that could necessarily harm you. Go to Pipehole.com and see what information it has about you, for example, where you've lived, what school you went to, all that kind of, where you live is probably, the kind of information that you don't want online, I guess, things like that.
So, I hope to see many of you or all of you on Thursday. And please bring your friends. And Mary's got the handouts if you need a couple for a friend that couldn't attend. And thank you all for coming.